Welcome to SnoozeCrime. Tonight we explore the spy in the bag, a case that does not rely on spectacle. There are no dramatic confessions, no clear villain standing in the light. Instead, this is a story about confinement, about secrecy, about a room that offered no explanation. A man connected to British intelligence was found inside a locked sports bag placed in a bathtub in a sealed London apartment. What followed was not clarity, but division. Was it an accident? Was it something deliberate? Or was it something that could never be fully explained? There will be no speculation beyond evidence, only what is known, and what remains unanswered. This is not a story told for shock. It is a story told slowly. We begin with a place. There is a certain kind of silence that only exists in large cities, not the silence of the countryside, not the silence of empty highways at night, but the silence behind closed doors, inside apartments where no one looks in, where life can stop, and no one immediately notices. In August 2010, London was hot, not warm, not pleasant, heavy, the kind of heat that lingers between brick buildings, that settles into narrow streets and refuses to move. In a quiet street in Pimlico, not far from the River Thames, one apartment remained closed for days. No open windows, no movement, no response. At first, nothing seemed unusual, until the smell began. His name was Gareth Williams. He was 31 years old, originally from Wales. Quiet, intelligent, exceptionally gifted in mathematics. He worked for GCHQ, the United Kingdom's Signals Intelligence Service. At the time of his death, he had been seconded to MI6, also known as the Secret Intelligence Service. Officially, he was an analyst. He did not carry a weapon. He was not a field agent. He did not operate under a false passport in foreign capitals, but he worked with information, sensitive information, encrypted data, material that most people will never see in their lifetime. In mid-August 2010, Gareth failed to show up for work. At first, colleagues were not alarmed, but it was unusual. He did not answer calls. He did not reply to messages. Days passed. Eventually, concern replaced routine. On August 23rd, police were asked to conduct a welfare check at his London flat. The door was locked. There were no signs of forced entry. Inside, everything appeared calm until they reached the bathroom. In the bathtub stood a large red North Face holdall. It was zipped shut, secured with a small padlock. Inside the bag, officers found Gareth Williams. He was naked. His body was folded tightly, knees drawn up toward his chest, compressed into a space that seemed almost impossibly small. There was no obvious blood, no visible trauma suggesting a violent struggle. The bathroom itself showed no clear signs of chaos, no overturned furniture, no broken fixtures, just a bag, in a bathtub, in a sealed apartment, and a body inside. How does someone end up inside a locked bag? And more importantly, how does someone lock themselves inside? From the outside, the zippers appeared to have been pulled closed, the small padlock threaded through the metal loops. For many observers, that detail became the center of the mystery, because once the bag was fully secured, there would be no easy way out. There was another detail. The heating in the flat had been turned on. In August, during a heat wave, the temperature inside the apartment had risen significantly. This accelerated decomposition, which meant that by the time Gareth was found, determining an exact time of death was already complicated. Why was the heating on? Was it accidental? Was it deliberate? Or was it unrelated to anything meaningful? In cases like this, even ordinary details begin to feel suspicious. But suspicion is not evidence, and that distinction matters. Investigators examined the apartment carefully. There were no broken locks, no damaged windows, no immediate sign that someone had forced their way inside. Forensic teams searched for fingerprints and DNA. They did not find evidence of a clear intruder. No unknown fingerprints on the bag. No obvious trace of a second person. That absence would later become one of the strongest arguments for the theory of accidental death. But absence can mean different things. It can mean no one else was there, or it can mean someone was careful. In 2010, the world of intelligence was changing. Cyber operations were becoming central to national security. Governments were not only gathering secrets through human sources, they were gathering them through code, encryption, digital intercepts, network infiltration. Gareth Williams was part of that world. Reports later suggested he may have been involved in work connected to Russia. That has never been fully detailed in public. Intelligence agencies rarely provide specifics, but the timing mattered. In that same period, diplomatic tensions between the United Kingdom and Russia were strained. Russian operatives had been exposed in the United States. Spy swaps were making headlines. Public trust in intelligence services was cautious. So when a young code expert connected to MI6 was found dead under bizarre circumstances, speculation followed naturally. Was this a tragic accident or something more deliberate? From the beginning, investigators considered several explanations. One possibility was that Gareth had placed himself inside the bag voluntarily. Some reports suggested he had an interest in private experimentation, including forms of self-bondage. Under this theory, he may have climbed inside the holdall, zipped it shut and somehow secured it, only to suffocate accidentally. Police conducted reconstruction experiments. In at least one controlled test, a person was able to get into a similar bag and close it from the inside. It was difficult, but not impossible. Still, many remained unconvinced, because difficulty is not the same as plausibility, and plausibility is not the same as proof. Gareth's family struggled to accept the idea of an accident. They described him as cautious, measured, not reckless. They could not reconcile the image of the son they knew with the scenario being suggested. Their doubts would lead to continued public scrutiny, and eventually a formal inquest. But in August 2010, none of that had happened yet. There was only confusion, and a bathroom that refused to explain itself. Imagine the final moments. A small bathroom, a closed door, a sealed apartment, no neighbors hearing a struggle, no CCTV footage showing visitors entering or leaving, just stillness. If Gareth climbed into that bag alone, he did so knowing that once it was locked, there would be no easy way out. If someone else was present, they left no obvious trace. That is the tension at the center of this case. Two possibilities, both unsettling. One suggests a private experiment gone wrong. The other suggests a level of precision that borders on professional. By the end of August 2010, these were the basic facts. A 31-year-old intelligence analyst was found dead in his London flat. His body was inside a locked sports bag. There were no clear signs of forced entry. There was no confirmed evidence of a struggle. The heating had been turned on, and no definitive explanation had been established. Everything else was interpretation, and interpretation is where cases begin to divide people. Some cases are loud. They involve violence that cannot be ignored. Others are quiet. They leave behind a room, an object, a single unanswered question. The death of Gareth Williams belongs to the second category. It does not shout, it lingers. In the next part, we will step away from the bathroom and look at the man himself. Who was Gareth Williams beyond his job title? What kind of life did he live? And why did his death quickly become more than a personal tragedy? For now, we leave the apartment as it was found, still, sealed, and holding a mystery that has never fully settled. Before there was a mystery, there was a person. Before headlines, before speculation, before theories, there was Gareth Williams. To understand the weight of his death, we have to understand the life he lived, not the version shaped by intelligence agencies, not the version shaped by media narratives, but the quieter version, the mathematician, the son, the private man. Gareth Williams was born in Wales. He grew up on the island of Anglesey, a place of coastline and wind, not secrecy, not espionage. Those who knew him described him as exceptionally bright from a young age. Mathematics came naturally to him, patterns, logic, structure. While others saw numbers, he saw systems. He studied at Bangor University, where he earned a degree in mathematics. He later completed a PhD in the same field. His academic work focused on complex mathematical modeling. Abstract, precise, highly specialized, he was not drawn to attention. He did not cultivate drama. He was known for cycling long distances alone, for keeping routines, for living simply. At some point after his academic work, Gareth was recruited by GCHQ. GCHQ is the British government's Signals Intelligence and Cybersecurity Agency. Its work is rarely visible. Its employees rarely speak publicly. For someone with Gareth's skill set, it was a natural fit. Mathematics is the backbone of encryption. Encryption is the backbone of modern intelligence. By the late 2000s, cyber operations were no longer theoretical. They were active. States were targeting digital infrastructure, monitoring communications, breaking codes, protecting their own. Gareth's work would have placed him at the center of that transformation, not as a public figure, but as part of a system designed to remain invisible. In 2009, Gareth was seconded to MI6. This move placed him physically in London, specifically in an MI6-linked facility. Secondments between agencies are not unusual, but they often indicate involvement in projects requiring cross-department expertise. He rented a modest flat in Pimlico. He did not fill it with excessive decoration. He did not appear to entertain frequently. Colleagues described him as polite, professional, reserved. There was no indication that he felt threatened, no recorded complaints of fear, no reported conflicts at work. On the surface, his life appeared stable. Intelligence work requires compartmentalization. Information is separated. Access is restricted. Even colleagues may not know the full scope of each other's projects. This creates an unusual professional culture. You can work beside someone for years without truly knowing what they do. Friends outside the service knew little about his assignments. Family members knew even less. That secrecy is normal, but in retrospect, it complicates everything. Because when someone living a classified life dies under strange circumstances, every unknown becomes magnified. During the investigation, police examined Gareth's personal life. They reviewed his internet history, his phone, his purchases. They found evidence suggesting he had visited websites related to bondage. There were also reports that he owned women's clothing. These details were later introduced as part of the theory that he may have engaged in forms of private experimentation. It is important to pause here. Private interests are not crimes. They are not evidence of instability, but they were used to construct a possible explanation. Under that theory, Gareth may have entered the bag voluntarily as part of a form of self-restraint. If that was the case, the act would have required planning, testing, and a willingness to accept risk. Those who knew him struggled with that image. They described him as cautious, methodical, not impulsive. But caution in one area of life does not guarantee caution in all others. That tension would later divide observers. There was no suicide note, no indication of depression, no documented mental health crisis. Toxicology reports did not indicate heavy intoxication. There were no defensive wounds, no signs of struggle on his body that clearly indicated restraint by another person. Everything returned to the same question: was this deliberate self-confinement, or was someone else present? The difficulty lies in what was not found. No fingerprints on the inside of the bag, no DNA from a second confirmed individual, but also no clear mechanism explaining how the bag could be locked from inside without extraordinary dexterity. In 2010, tensions between Western intelligence services and Russia were heightened. Cyber espionage was increasing. Spy exchanges were making international headlines. While no official statement ever confirmed Gareth's direct involvement in Russian-related operations, some media reports suggested he had been working on projects connected to financial tracking and organized crime networks. If true, that would place him near sensitive territory. But there is a difference between possibility and proof, and responsible analysis must keep those separate. There is no public evidence confirming that Gareth was targeted by a foreign power. There is also no public evidence conclusively ruling it out. That ambiguity fuels the case. After his death, two versions of Gareth began to form. One was the quiet mathematician, disciplined, private, reserved. The other was the man possibly engaging in risky private experimentation. Those narratives are not mutually exclusive, but they create different emotional conclusions. If he was methodical, why would he take a risk that offered no exit? If he was curious and experimental, why would there be no evidence of prior similar behavior? The truth may sit somewhere in between, or somewhere entirely different. When intelligence agencies are involved, public trust becomes fragile. Some people assume transparency, others assume concealment. If authorities say it was an accident, skeptics see protection. If authorities suggest murder, others see incompetence. Gareth's case sits at the intersection of those suspicions. His profession makes neutrality difficult because secrecy invites projection. Strip away the agencies. Remove the geopolitics. What remains is a 31-year-old man who moved from Wales to London for work, who cycled long distances, who lived alone, who kept much of his world internal. His final days are not fully mapped. There were no confirmed visitors recorded entering his flat before his death, no clear final phone call suggesting distress, no recorded alarm, just silence, and eventually, discovery. In part 1, we stood inside a bathroom. In part 2, we stand inside a life. Neither space offers easy answers. The more we learn about Gareth Williams, the less this case feels theatrical. It feels contained, controlled, almost too controlled. In the next part, we will return to the physical mechanics of the bag itself. How large was it? How was it secured? What did forensic reconstruction reveal? And where did the official explanation begin to fracture? For now, we pause with the man behind the code, not as a symbol, not as a theory, but as a person whose final moments remain uncertain. We return to the bathroom, not to the mystery, not yet, to the object. Because before we consider motive, before we consider geopolitics, before we consider intention, we have to consider physics. A red North Face holdall placed inside a bathtub, zipped shut, secured with a small padlock. Inside it, the body of Gareth Williams. The central question is not emotional, it is mechanical. Could he physically have done this alone? The holdall was not small, but it was not large enough to comfortably contain a grown man. Its approximate dimensions were around 80 centimeters in length. Flexible fabric, soft sides, 2 zipper tracks running along the top. At the end of the zippers were small metal eyelets. Through those eyelets a padlock had been placed. When zipped fully closed and locked, the opening could not be pulled apart. To exit the bag once secured would require unlocking it from the outside. There was no internal release mechanism, no hidden latch, no design intended for confinement. This was luggage, not restraint equipment. Gareth was found naked. His body was tightly folded, knees drawn toward his chest, head angled downward, arms positioned close to his torso. There were no obvious signs of binding on his wrists, no tape residue, no rope fibers clearly indicating external restraint. The space inside the bag would have been extremely limited. Once inside, movement would have been restricted. Breathing, while possible, would have been increasingly difficult as oxygen depleted, which raises the first layer of tension. If he entered voluntarily, he would have known there was no easy way out. This is where the question becomes precise. To recreate the scenario, investigators examined the zipper configuration. Both zipper pulls had been drawn to one end of the bag. The padlock was threaded through the aligned metal eyelets. For Gareth to have done this alone, he would have needed to enter the bag, pull both zipper tracks together from inside, align the metal eyelets precisely, thread the padlock through them, close the padlock, all without being able to fully see the mechanism, all while confined, all while reducing his own exit options to zero. Is that physically possible? The answer is not simple. Investigators conducted reconstruction experiments. A volunteer attempted to enter a similar holdall. Under controlled conditions, with time and without panic, It was possible to zip the bag shut from the inside. Difficult, but possible. However, the locking step was more complicated. Aligning the eyelets required precision. Threading a padlock through them required dexterity. Closing it required hand positioning in tight space. The reconstruction did demonstrate that, in theory, a person could secure the bag from within. But theory is not the same as natural probability. It required rehearsal, calm, and a willingness to fully commit to enclosure. Here the tension deepens. Forensic teams did not find Gareth's fingerprints on the outside of the bag in positions consistent with pulling the zippers shut, nor were there clear fingerprints from a second individual. The bag was largely clean, which creates two possibilities. If he locked it himself, why were there not clearer prints? If someone else locked it, why were there no prints from them either? One explanation is glove use, another is surface wiping, another is simple degradation of usable prints. None of these explanations are impossible, but none are definitive. Inside a sealed sports bag, oxygen becomes finite. The bathtub offered no additional ventilation. If Gareth entered voluntarily, he would have known that once the padlock clicked shut, escape would be extremely difficult. There were no clear scratch marks inside the bag, indicating frantic attempts to break free. No torn fabric, no broken zipper teeth. That detail matters, because panic leaves evidence. The absence of damage suggests either calm acceptance or rapid incapacitation, but toxicology reports did not show high levels of sedatives, which brings us back again. Could he physically have done this alone? Yes, in theory, but would someone methodical, intelligent, cautious, willingly eliminate their own exit? Remember the heating. The apartment's heating had been turned on in August. If Gareth acted alone, the heating setting becomes harder to explain. It would not have assisted the act. It would not have made confinement easier. But if someone wanted to accelerate decomposition, heat would serve that purpose. That interpretation introduces intent, but intent requires evidence, and here, evidence is thin. There is another layer. Mechanical possibility is one thing. Psychological commitment is another. To voluntarily lock oneself into a confined space requires trust in the process, trust that you can exit, trust that you will not panic, trust that oxygen will last long enough. If the lock was truly secured from outside, then Gareth would have had no such trust. If he secured it himself, he eliminated his own safety margin. That is not impossible. Supporters of the accident theory argue it was technically achievable. There were no clear signs of struggle, no confirmed intruder, no defensive injuries. Skeptics argue the locking mechanism was too precise. The heating is suspicious. The absence of fingerprints is troubling. The context of his intelligence work complicates neutrality. Both sides return to the same mechanical question. Could he physically have done it alone? And the honest answer remains, yes, but with difficulty, and difficulty invites doubt. The bag does not prove murder, but it does not comfortably prove accident either. It exists in that narrow space between, where possibility and plausibility begin to diverge. In the next part, we examine how officials interpreted these mechanics, why the initial suspicion of murder shifted, and why the final conclusion satisfied some, but left others unconvinced. For now, we remain with the object, a sports bag, a padlock, a bathtub, and a question that does not disappear. When a death is unusual, procedure takes over. The Metropolitan Police secured the flat in Pimlico. Forensic teams entered carefully. Every surface was documented, every object catalogued. The apartment showed no signs of forced entry, no broken locks, no damaged windows, no overturned furniture. The bathroom remained the focal point, a hold-all in a bathtub, a body inside. But unusual does not automatically mean homicide, and investigators are trained to resist narrative gravity. They examine evidence first, interpretation later. In the first stages of the investigation, police did not rule out foul play. In fact, homicide was considered a real possibility. The position of the body was strange, the locking mechanism was unusual, the heating was active. Given Gareth's connection to MI6 and GCHQ, the case was automatically sensitive. When someone associated with intelligence dies under ambiguous circumstances, the margin for error narrows. International implications cannot be ignored. However, sensitivity does not equal conspiracy. It simply raises the stakes. Post-mortem examination found no significant external injuries. There were no stab wounds, no gunshot trauma, no fractures suggesting violent restraint. There were minor marks on the body, but none conclusively indicating assault. Toxicology reports did not reveal lethal levels of drugs or alcohol. There was no evidence of poisoning, no clear sedative concentration that would suggest incapacitation prior to confinement. The official cause of death was recorded as likely asphyxiation, which returned investigators to the bag. If he suffocated inside it, how did he get there? Because of Gareth's employment history, British intelligence services were consulted. Details of his work were not fully disclosed to the public. Classified material remained classified. Officials stated there was no intelligence indicating that Gareth had been threatened. No confirmed evidence of foreign agents targeting him, no intercepts suggesting an imminent risk. But intelligence assessments are rarely absolute. They deal in probability, not certainty. Still, publicly, the message was consistent. There was no known operational reason for him to be killed. As reconstruction experiments suggested that self-confinement was physically possible, the investigative emphasis began to shift. The absence of defensive injuries, the absence of forced entry, the absence of foreign DNA. These elements collectively weakened the homicide theory. Investigators began leaning toward the possibility of accidental death, specifically a form of self-bondage gone wrong. The theory suggested that Gareth may have entered the bag voluntarily, intending to test his ability to escape. Perhaps believing he could exit before oxygen depletion became critical. But something prevented that. Panic, misjudgment, mechanical difficulty. The official narrative did not claim certainty, it claimed likelihood. In 2012, a formal inquest was held. An inquest does not determine criminal guilt, it determines the manner of death. The coroner reviewed forensic findings, heard testimony from experts, considered reconstruction evidence, and ultimately concluded that Gareth Williams had likely died accidentally. The ruling did not state murder, it did not state suicide, it described a probable accident linked to self-confinement. That conclusion brought procedural closure, but not emotional closure, and not universal agreement. Notice the wording: likely, probable, consistent with. In complex cases, officials often avoid absolutes because absolutes require certainty, and certainty was not available. The official position rested on cumulative reasoning: no intruder evidence, no defensive injuries, no confirmed threat, physical possibility demonstrated. Together, these factors formed a narrative that, while unusual, did not require a second person. But that narrative depended on accepting mechanical plausibility as sufficient explanation, and not everyone did. Critics highlighted several concerns: the absence of Gareth's fingerprints in expected positions, the heating left on during summer, the precision required to lock the bag from inside, the context of his intelligence role. Each point individually might be explainable. Together they create discomfort, not proof but discomfort, and discomfort lingers in public memory longer than official rulings. Some observers questioned whether intelligence agencies had incentive to avoid labeling the case a homicide. A murder involving a government cryptanalyst could imply vulnerability, operational compromise, foreign infiltration. But suspicion of incentive is not evidence of action. It is possible for institutions to prefer certain conclusions without manufacturing them. The distinction matters. Responsible analysis requires acknowledging both the possibility of institutional bias and the lack of proof that such bias altered the findings. Initially, media coverage speculated heavily about espionage. But after the inquest ruling, the dominant narrative softened. The case became less about foreign assassins and more about tragic miscalculation. For some, that explanation provided relief. For others, it felt incomplete, because even if mechanically possible, the scenario required extraordinary personal commitment, and that psychological barrier remained difficult for many to accept. An official investigation aims for closure, but closure and certainty are not the same thing. In Gareth Williams' case, the state reached a conclusion. The public reached a question. Could he physically have done it alone? The investigation said yes, likely. The doubt said yes, but uneasily. In the next part, we step outside the courtroom and into the wider reaction. The family's response, expert criticism, and why, years later, the phrase "spy in the bag" still carries tension. Official conclusions can close a file. They do not always close a wound. For Gareth Williams' family, the inquest ruling did not bring peace. It brought distance, because the version of events presented in court did not resemble the man they knew. To investigators, Gareth was a subject in a forensic framework. To his family, he was a son, a brother, a quiet presence in a small Welsh community. Gareth Williams had grown up on Anglesey. He was described as thoughtful, reserved, cautious in his decisions, not reckless, not impulsive. He planned his cycling routes carefully. He kept structured routines. He rarely acted without calculation. To them, the idea that he would voluntarily place himself inside a locked sports bag, with no guaranteed exit, felt incompatible with his character, not impossible, but deeply unlikely. During the inquest, aspects of Gareth's private life were discussed publicly. Websites he had visited, clothing he had purchased, speculation about personal experimentation. For his family, this was painful, because those details, while possibly relevant to investigators, reshaped public perception of him. Instead of being remembered primarily as a mathematician and analyst, he became associated with a theory, the theory of self-bondage. The family questioned whether this narrative had been accepted too quickly, whether alternative explanations had been sufficiently explored. Some independent forensic specialists expressed reservations about the official conclusion. They pointed to the locking precision, the lack of clear fingerprint evidence, the unusual heating setting. Again, none of these points proved homicide, but they complicated certainty. When experts disagree, public doubt expands, and when doubt expands in a case involving intelligence services, suspicion follows naturally. The family did not publicly accuse a foreign government. They did not present a specific alternative scenario. They simply maintained that the accidental explanation did not convince them, that their son deserved further scrutiny. There were also concerns about access to classified information. Certain aspects of Gareth's professional work were not disclosed during proceedings. National security considerations limited what could be discussed in open court. For the public, that gap is abstract. For a family seeking answers, it can feel personal. What if something relevant remained hidden? What if the full context was never examined? These questions do not prove concealment, but they create emotional distance from official findings. Trust is fragile in intelligence-related cases. Governments operate within necessary secrecy, but secrecy can erode confidence when tragedy occurs. The British government later issued an apology to the family for shortcomings in the handling of the case, not for causing the death, but for failures in communication and support. That distinction matters. An apology for process is not an admission of wrongdoing, yet even procedural missteps can deepen grief. For the public, the phrase "spy in the bag" carries intrigue. For the family, it carries permanence. Their son's final moments are frozen in a single image: a holdall, a bathtub, a locked zipper, and no definitive answer. They continue to question whether the reconstruction experiments truly reflected real conditions, whether panic would have altered mechanics, whether a second person could have left no trace. Their doubt does not prove murder, but it resists closure. Forensic logic asks, is it physically possible? Emotional logic asks, does this align with who he was? The investigation leaned on the first. The family leaned on the second. Both forms of reasoning are human. Both can coexist, but they rarely produce the same conclusion. In high-profile cases, identity can become secondary to explanation. Gareth Williams became a question, a case study, a headline. But for those who knew him, he remained a person whose absence was immediate and permanent. Doubt, in that context, becomes protective. If the explanation feels incomplete, accepting it can feel like surrender. And so the question remains open, not legally, but personally. Institutions seek finality. Families seek truth. Sometimes those align, sometimes they do not. In the death of Gareth Williams, the official file may be closed, but the uncertainty has never fully settled. In the next part, we widen the frame, beyond the apartment, beyond the courtroom, into the geopolitical atmosphere of 2010, the intelligence tensions, the timing, and why the word spy never disappeared from this case. Before we can measure risk, we have to understand environment, not the apartment, not the bathtub, the institutional world in which Gareth Williams worked, because intelligence work changes the meaning of death. In ordinary professions, a sudden death is personal. In intelligence professions, a sudden death can become structural. When most people imagine intelligence agencies, they imagine field operatives, diplomatic cover, foreign cities, disguises. But the majority of modern intelligence personnel never leave their desks. They work with code, signals, financial patterns, metadata. By 2010, agencies like GCHQ had become technical institutions as much as intelligence services. Mathematicians were not support staff, they were core assets. Encryption had evolved dramatically in the late 1990s and early 2000s. Global banking systems relied on secure protocols. Telecommunications were increasingly digitized, and state actors were attempting to intercept, disrupt, or penetrate those systems. A cryptographic analyst was not simply decoding messages, he was interacting with the architecture of digital trust. One of the defining features of intelligence work is compartmentalization. No one person sees everything. Projects are divided. Access is restricted by clearance level and operational necessity. Even within the same building, two analysts may not know the nature of each other's assignments. This serves two purposes: operational protection, damage limitation. If one individual is compromised, the system remains intact. This structure also creates a peculiar reality after death. When an intelligence employee dies, very few people truly know the scope of what they were working on. Not their family, not their friends, often not even their colleagues. This means that after Gareth Williams's death, there was no single civilian authority capable of fully narrating his professional life, and that absence of narrative creates space. In 2009, Gareth was seconded from GCHQ to MI6. Secondment is not unusual, but it is meaningful. It suggests collaboration between signals intelligence and human intelligence operations. Technical specialists are often embedded within broader strategic projects. A mathematician might assist with decryption of foreign communications, financial network analysis, counterintelligence mapping, cyber defense modeling. Secondment often implies integration into sensitive operations requiring multi-agency expertise. It does not imply field risk, but it does imply value, and value changes perception. Intelligence agencies constantly assess risk, operational risk, diplomatic risk, personnel risk. Analysts are not usually considered high-risk targets. They are not public, they are not visible, but they may still possess critical knowledge. However, intelligence risk assessment typically considers whether eliminating an individual would produce strategic gain. Would removing one analyst significantly disrupt operations? In most large agencies, redundancy is built into structure. Projects are shared, knowledge is distributed. Eliminating one specialist rarely collapses a program. This matters when evaluating foreign targeting scenarios. The strategic incentive must outweigh diplomatic fallout. In Gareth's case, there is no public evidence that he held uniquely singular knowledge, which lowers, but does not eliminate, targeting probability. When a member of an intelligence agency dies unexpectedly, internal reviews occur. Security teams assess whether classified material was exposed, whether devices were compromised, whether external interference is suspected. These reviews are rarely public. Silence does not necessarily indicate concealment. It often indicates protocol. If internal security had detected strong evidence of foreign interference, it is reasonable to assume countermeasures would have followed. No public escalation occurred after Gareth's death. No expulsions, no retaliatory diplomatic action. In intelligence ecosystems, escalation leaves faint but detectable ripples. Those ripples were not observed publicly. That absence weighs against foreign assassination theories, but again, absence does not equal impossibility. There is another layer. Technical specialists often live ordinary lives, no security detail, no protective convoy, no visible counter-surveillance. Their safety relies on anonymity. If anonymity holds, risk remains low, but if anonymity fails, vulnerability increases rapidly. Was Gareth known to foreign services? It is possible that his name existed within counterintelligence databases, but being known does not equal being prioritized. Thousands of intelligence employees worldwide are catalogued by adversarial services. Only a small fraction are targeted. Target selection is strategic, not symbolic. Some observers argue that intelligence agencies have incentive to avoid labeling such a death as homicide, because homicide implies breach. Breach implies vulnerability. Vulnerability implies failure. But institutions also have incentive to identify foreign threats accurately. Failure to detect external assassination would represent far greater systemic risk than reputational discomfort. In intelligence work, operational threat outweighs public relations. If credible evidence of foreign involvement had emerged internally, it would have triggered quiet but serious countermeasures. There is no public evidence that such measures followed Gareth's death. That does not guarantee absence of concern, but it tempers escalation narratives. Intelligence silence is structural, not emotional. Agencies do not narrate operational detail for reassurance. They protect classified frameworks. For families, that silence can feel evasive. For analysts, it is normal. This difference in expectation creates tension. The family seeks transparency. The institution preserves secrecy. Neither posture automatically implies deception, but the friction is unavoidable. In 2010, cyber operations were accelerating. Stuxnet would soon become public knowledge. State-backed digital campaigns were expanding. Financial tracking systems were under constant probe. London was a financial epicenter. Russian capital moved heavily through UK systems. Organized crime and intelligence networks occasionally intersected. If Gareth's work involved encrypted financial tracing, he would have been operating within a contested digital space. But contested space does not equal lethal targeting. Digital rivalry is often contained within servers, not apartments. There is a paradox in intelligence work. The more valuable your knowledge, the less visible you are. And the less visible you are, the less likely you are to be symbolically targeted. Field operatives may become public diplomatic crises. Technical analysts remain abstract. If eliminated, their absence would not send a geopolitical message. It would remain obscure. That obscurity reduces strategic incentive for assassination, unless the motive were extremely specific, and no such specificity has emerged publicly. When evaluating intelligence-linked deaths, one must separate narrative attraction from structural probability. Narrative attraction pulls toward espionage. Structural probability favors accident unless counter-evidence emerges. In Gareth Williams' case, the intelligence climate makes assassination plausible. But structural probability still leans toward internal causation, due to lack of corroborating signals. That tension is what sustains the case. Understanding the institutional world Gareth inhabited does not solve his death, but it reframes it. He was not a cinematic spy. He was a technical specialist embedded in a vast system of encrypted exchange. His environment was secretive, but secrecy alone does not generate violence. In the next part, we will analyze something more technical, not geopolitics, but logistics. If this had been staged, what would staging require in a surveillance-heavy city like London? Not imagination, architecture. We continue. If Gareth Williams did not enter the bag alone, then someone else did. And if someone else did, then the scene inside that bathroom was constructed. Not chaotic, constructed. Before asking who, we must ask how. Because staging a death is not narrative work, it is logistical work. Gareth lived in Pimlico, central London, a district layered with surveillance. By 2010, London was one of the most CCTV-saturated cities in the world. Estimates suggested hundreds of thousands of cameras across Greater London. Not every camera works perfectly, not every hallway is covered. But urban anonymity is limited. For a staged homicide to occur, a second individual would need to approach the building, enter without force, avoid significant detection, exit without trace. There were no confirmed reports of forced entry. This suggests one of three possibilities. Gareth opened the door voluntarily. The visitor had authorized access. Entry occurred through deception. If entry was voluntary, then Gareth did not perceive immediate threat. That changes psychological framing, because targeted assassinations rarely begin with comfort. They begin with surprise. If a second person was present, control becomes central. How does one move an adult man into a confined sports bag, inside a bathtub, without leaving defensive injuries? Forensic reports did not document clear signs of violent struggle. No significant bruising consistent with prolonged restraint. No fractures, no torn fingernails, no defensive wounds typical of forced confinement. This forces a critical question. If this was staged, was Gareth incapacitated? Toxicology reports did not reveal lethal sedative levels, no confirmed evidence of injected substances. Could a fast-acting agent have been used? In theory, yes. But such agents often leave detectable markers. None were definitively identified. This does not eliminate incapacitation, but it complicates it. Once inside the bathroom, the staging would require removing clothing, folding the body, zipping the bag, aligning eyelets, securing the padlock, placing the bag neatly in the tub. Each step increases time inside the apartment. Each step increases risk of detection. Professional operations are designed for efficiency. Speed reduces exposure, but folding a human body into a confined holdall is not rapid, it is awkward. It requires leverage, it requires proximity, and proximity increases transfer risk. Yet no clear foreign DNA profile was identified, no secondary fingerprint pattern definitively established. If this was staged, it was staged with extreme caution. Crime scenes rarely remain sterile. Even careful individuals shed skin cells, fibers, microscopic trace. In 2010, forensic capability was advanced. Low copy number DNA testing was widely used in the UK. The absence of a confirmed second-party DNA profile suggests either no second party, protective equipment, or incomplete recovery. Professional operators would use gloves, possibly protective clothing, but wearing full protective gear inside a private London flat raises practical concerns. Entry and exit would require concealment. No witnesses reported individuals in conspicuous attire. Again, absence does not equal impossibility, but it increases required precision. The heating being turned on remains one of the most discussed elements. If Gareth acted alone, the heating seems purposeless. If someone staged the scene, heat could accelerate decomposition. Accelerated decomposition complicates time of death estimation, but it also draws attention. Overheating an apartment in August is noticeable. Neighbors might feel warmth through shared walls. Energy consumption records would show unusual activity. There is no public record indicating that heating data became a decisive forensic pivot, which leaves the heating ambiguous, suspicious to some, inconclusive to others. How long would staging take? Let us imagine. Entry, incapacitation, body positioning, bag securing, scene normalization. Exit. Even under efficient conditions, this is not a 2-minute process. It likely requires 20 to 40 minutes at minimum, in central London, in a residential building, in daylight or early evening conditions. Professional operations aim to minimize exposure time, but folding a body into luggage is not optimized for speed. That tension matters. Leaving the apartment undetected is as critical as entering. No public reports confirm suspicious individuals captured on CCTV entering or leaving his building at relevant times. No diplomatic crisis followed. No intelligence alerts surfaced publicly. Professional operations that target intelligence personnel typically trigger internal alarm. Even if not publicized, patterns shift. Counter-surveillance intensifies. There is no public evidence of such shifts linked to Gareth's death. If this were a foreign operation, what strategic objective would it serve? Elimination, intimidation, message sending. If message sending were the goal, a cryptic, bizarre staging would be counterintuitive. Professional signals are usually clearer. If elimination were the goal, simpler methods exist. Accidental falls, medical simulation, traffic incidents. The bag is theatrical. Theatrical methods introduce unpredictability. Professionals avoid unpredictability, unless unpredictability itself is the mask. But that argument becomes circular. Statistically, accidental deaths involving self-confinement are rare, but state-sponsored assassinations inside sealed London flats are rarer still. Probability does not eliminate possibility, but it exerts gravity, and gravity pulls toward the more common explanation. For a staged homicide to have occurred, it would require controlled entry, rapid incapacitation, no defensive trauma, no detectable secondary DNA, precise locking, timed exit, no public intelligence ripple. Possible, yes. High confidence probability based on available public evidence? No. This does not confirm accident, but it narrows plausible staging frameworks. Architecture strips away drama. When we analyze entry points, timelines, logistics, and surveillance density, the assassination narrative becomes heavier, not impossible, but heavy. And heavy operations leave marks. In Gareth Williams' case, the marks are faint. In the next part, we examine institutions themselves, how governments communicate under uncertainty, why language like likely is chosen, and how procedural handling can deepen suspicion, even without malicious intent. When an ordinary citizen dies under unclear circumstances, the process is personal. When someone linked to intelligence dies, the process becomes institutional, and institutions behave differently than individuals. They do not grieve publicly. They do not speculate emotionally. They calculate exposure. In Gareth Williams' case, the official ruling used careful language, likely accidental, consistent with, no evidence of. These are not weak phrases, they are legal phrases. Institutions rarely say certain unless certainty is absolute, because certainty creates liability. Probability creates closure without commitment. This does not mean deception, it means risk management. Every word spoken publicly by state officials is filtered through legal review, security review, political consequence. That filtering can feel sterile. To families, it can feel evasive, but to institutions, it is protocol. A coroner's inquest is not a criminal trial. It does not assign guilt. It determines manner of death. The inquest into Gareth's death examined forensic findings, reconstruction experiments, toxicology reports, expert testimony, but it did not fully disclose classified operational material, because it could not. National security restrictions limit public transparency. This creates an inherent asymmetry. The public sees partial evidence. The state sees more. That asymmetry does not prove concealment, but it makes full trust difficult. Years after Gareth's death, the British government issued an apology to his family, not for causing his death, but for shortcomings in communication and support. This distinction matters. An apology for process does not equal admission of wrongdoing. Yet psychologically, apology can reinforce suspicion because it signals that something was handled imperfectly, and imperfection, in high-sensitivity cases, magnifies doubt. Critics often argue, if the death were murder, the state would avoid admitting it to prevent embarrassment. But institutions operate on layered incentives. Yes, reputational management matters, but so does operational security. If a foreign power successfully assassinated an intelligence employee inside London, the threat would not be reputational, it would be structural. And structural threats demand response. Quiet response, perhaps, but response nonetheless. There is no public evidence of retaliatory escalation following Gareth's death, no diplomatic expulsions linked to the case, no publicized counterintelligence sweeps triggered by confirmed foreign interference. Again, absence does not equal impossibility, but it weighs against high-confidence assassination conclusions. Modern democratic governments exist in tension with intelligence secrecy. Citizens expect explanation. Intelligence agencies protect classification. When tragedy intersects with secrecy, transparency cannot be total. This creates a vacuum, and vacuum attracts narrative, not because institutions are always lying, but because they cannot tell the whole story. In Gareth's case, this gap persists. We do not know precisely what he was working on in his final weeks. We do not know whether internal risk reviews raised quiet alarms. We do not know what was discussed in classified channels. The public record is finite. The classified record is not. That asymmetry sustains uncertainty. The phrase "spy in the bag" was not chosen by investigators. It was chosen by media. Headlines simplify. They condense nuance into narrative hooks. Gareth was not publicly confirmed as a field spy. He was a technical analyst. But analyst found in Holdall lacks gravity. Spy in the bag carries cinematic weight. Once a label like that forms, it reshapes perception. Even official statements struggle to compete with narrative framing. Institutional language is cautious. Media language is magnetic. Magnetism often wins. Institutions default toward conservative conclusions, not politically conservative, procedurally conservative. They adopt the explanation that requires the fewest unproven assumptions, aligns most closely with physical evidence, avoids escalation without corroboration. In Gareth's case, accidental confinement required fewer external assumptions than foreign assassination. That does not make it emotionally satisfying, but it fits procedural logic. Institutions are built on procedural logic, families are built on emotional logic, and the public oscillates between both. In intelligence-linked cases, trust is fragile, not because intelligence agencies always deceive, but because secrecy makes independent verification difficult. The public cannot independently audit classified information. Therefore, acceptance depends on institutional credibility. When any inconsistency appears, even minor, confidence fractures. The heating detail, the fingerprint uncertainty, the unusual staging, each element alone is manageable. Together, they produce friction. Institutions seek closure. Friction resists closure. Modern intelligence work exists within ambiguity. Operations are denied. Methods are undisclosed. Certainty is rare. When death enters that ecosystem, ambiguity compounds. The official file may close, but public cognition does not, because the structure of secrecy prevents total resolution. In Gareth Williams' case, institutional behavior did not produce proof of foul play, but it did not eliminate discomfort either. It produced a controlled conclusion, and control, when visible, can feel curated. Institutions move toward stability. Families move toward truth. Journalists move toward narrative. The public moves toward coherence. When these movements do not align, cases endure. Gareth Williams' death exists in that misalignment. Mechanically plausible, emotionally disputed, institutionally contained, geopolitically contextualized, and never fully quiet. If Gareth Williams entered the bag alone, then his final moments were not political. They were biological, and biology does not negotiate, it follows process. To evaluate the accident theory properly, we must ask two questions. Why would someone voluntarily enter extreme confinement? And what happens inside the body when escape becomes impossible? Voluntary confinement is not unprecedented. Humans engage in restrictive environments for many reasons: sensory experimentation, adrenaline stimulation, psychological testing, control exploration. Some individuals report heightened awareness when confined, a sharpening of perception, a feeling of edge. This does not imply recklessness. Often it is curiosity. Controlled risk. The key word is controlled. The assumption underlying voluntary confinement is always, I can get out. Remove that assumption and the experience changes completely. Control is psychological. If Gareth believed he could exit the bag, then entering it would not feel suicidal. It would feel temporary. Testing limits can create cognitive narrowing. When focused on mechanics, zipper alignment, positioning, long-term consequence may fade into background, especially if prior attempts succeeded. There is no confirmed evidence that Gareth practiced similar confinement before, but absence of evidence does not eliminate private rehearsal. Private behavior leaves little trace. Inside a zipped holdall placed in a bathtub, oxygen availability becomes finite. Air volume depends on internal bag space, degree of sealing, body displacement. As oxygen decreases, carbon dioxide increases. The body responds predictably. First, elevated breathing rate, then increased heart rate, then air hunger. Air hunger is not subtle. It is one of the most powerful survival signals in the human body. Panic typically follows, unless something interrupts it, such as loss of consciousness, rapid incapacitation, restricted movement. If Gareth entered voluntarily and miscalculated, he would likely experience escalating distress, unless he lost consciousness before panic fully developed. Investigators noted the absence of significant damage inside the bag: no torn seams, no broken zippers, no clear scratch patterns. This absence is psychologically complex, because panic often produces struggle, but not always. If oxygen decline is gradual, weakness can precede full panic. If body positioning restricts leverage, struggle may be limited. If the individual believes escape is still possible, panic may be delayed. Delayed panic can be fatal. Not everyone responds to confinement the same way. Some experience immediate claustrophobic distress, others tolerate restricted space calmly. Gareth was described as disciplined, analytical, methodical. Such personality traits can correlate with higher tolerance for structured stress. But we must avoid overreach. Psychological profiles are probabilistic, not predictive. The question remains, would someone cautious eliminate their own exit? Caution in public life does not always mirror private experimentation. Human identity is compartmentalized, just like intelligence work. Accidents involving controlled risk often involve miscalculation, not recklessness, misjudgment of timing, misjudgment of mechanism, misjudgment of body response. If Gareth believed he could manipulate the zippers internally but underestimated the difficulty once fully sealed, the margin for error would shrink quickly. Confinement amplifies small mistakes. Research into extreme risk-taking shows that highly intelligent individuals sometimes engage in controlled edge behaviors, not because they are unstable, but because they are curious. Exploration of boundary can coexist with professional competence. There is no public record suggesting Gareth had a history of reckless behavior, But absence of public record does not equal absence of private experimentation. Again, ambiguity persists. The accident theory does not require conspiracy. It requires misjudgment. Misjudgment is human, even in highly intelligent individuals, especially in private contexts where no external correction exists. Confinement eliminates external correction. There is no one to intervene, no one to unlock the padlock, no one to respond to distress. Silence becomes absolute. If Gareth Williams entered the bag alone, then his death was not geopolitical. It was a tragic convergence of curiosity and miscalculation. If he did not, then someone else constructed that silence. We cannot conclusively prove either. But biologically, the accident scenario is coherent. Psychologically, it is plausible. Emotionally, it is unsettling. And that combination sustains doubt. When all noise fades, what remains is structure. A room, a bag, a body, a system of institutions surrounding it. Over the course of this story, we have examined the discovery, the man, the mechanics, the investigation, the family's doubt, the intelligence climate, the logistical feasibility of staging, the behavior of institutions, and the psychology of confinement. Now we place them side by side, not to force conclusion, but to measure weight. Could Gareth Williams physically have entered the bag and locked it himself? Yes. Reconstruction demonstrated possibility. The zipper alignment was achievable. The padlock could be secured internally. The absence of definitive struggle marks does not contradict self-confinement. Mechanically, the accident theory stands, but mechanical possibility is not emotional certainty. There were no confirmed signs of violent assault, no conclusive foreign DNA, no chemical incapacitation detected at lethal levels, no forced entry, no overt defensive trauma. The forensic field leans toward internal causation. Yet the fingerprint ambiguity, the heating anomaly, and the unusual staging resist intuitive comfort. Forensics did not prove homicide, but it did not silence doubt. The geopolitical environment of 2010 was tense. Russian intelligence networks had been exposed. Cyber operations were intensifying. Gareth worked inside that ecosystem. Assassination was plausible within that climate, but plausibility requires supporting signals. No diplomatic escalation followed. No confirmed counterintelligence response surfaced publicly. No direct link between his work and targeted retaliation was established. Intelligence context amplifies suspicion. It does not confirm causation. Staging such a death in central London would require precision. Controlled entry, controlled incapacitation, controlled exit, minimal trace. No confirmed CCTV pattern has publicly supported such a sequence. Professional operations are possible, but they are rarely invisible without consequence. Logistics weigh against high-confidence assassination theory, not conclusively, but meaningfully. Institutions spoke in cautious language. Likely, consistent with, probable. To some, this signals containment. To others, professionalism. Secrecy limits transparency. Transparency limits speculation. The gap between the two sustains public tension. Institutions close files. Ambiguity leaves them half open. If Gareth entered voluntarily, he misjudged. If he misjudged, the tragedy was private, human, silent, and contained within four walls. If someone else entered that space, then the silence was constructed, intentional, designed. But the psychological profile does not eliminate either possibility. Intelligence professionals are not immune to curiosity. Curiosity is not immunity from error. Error is not evidence of innocence, and doubt is not evidence of guilt. This case rests on a divide between plausibility and probability. Assassination is plausible, accidental confinement is plausible, but probability leans toward the explanation requiring fewer unproven assumptions. Based on public evidence, that explanation remains accidental self-confinement. That does not make it emotionally satisfying. but it aligns with structural evaluation. The more extraordinary the claim, the stronger the evidence required. Extraordinary evidence has not emerged publicly. The case persists not because it was definitively espionage, but because it intersects with discomfort, confinement discomfort, secrecy discomfort, institutional discomfort. The image of a locked bag in a bathtub is resistant to closure. It is too precise, too deliberate in appearance, even if mechanically accidental. The human mind searches for narrative symmetry. This case offers none. We do not know Gareth's final thoughts. We do not know whether he rehearsed the act. We do not know whether he hesitated. We do not know whether he believed he could escape. We do not know whether internal intelligence discussions revealed concerns that remain classified. And we may never know, because some cases resolve legally, but remain incomplete psychologically. In the end, the death of Gareth Williams may represent something far less dramatic than espionage. It may represent a moment of private miscalculation, or it may represent something that left no detectable trace. Both possibilities exist. Only one aligns more closely with available evidence, but certainty is not available to us, and that absence of certainty is what allows this case to endure, not loudly, quietly, in analytical spaces, in late-night searches, in the gap between possibility and proof. The apartment in Pimlico is empty now. The bathtub no longer holds a red bag. The institutions have closed their files. The family carries its questions, and the public carries an image. A man connected to intelligence, a locked hold-all, a room without witnesses. We are left with probability and with doubt. Thank you for listening to SnoozeCrime. Real cases, told slowly. Sleep. Reflect. Return.